Hello everyone, it's Nina, and welcome back to my channel. If you guys are new to my channel, thank you so much for clicking on this video. My name is Nina, and as you will soon see, I read a lot of queer historical romance books. I have quite a long list of favorites that I wanted to talk to you guys about in today's video. I'm not going to get too deep into the summaries of all these books, but I definitely will mention at least the time period, what type of queer rep there is, and just kind of like some general vibes and tropes for each of the books and series we're going to talk about. I have a lot of books to talk about in this video, so with that intro out of the way, let's get right on into it. Actually, really briefly, I wanted to touch on two other things first. If you don't really care about this, I'll just leave timestamps down below to get to the actual book recommendations. But the first is the topic of why do I like queer historical romance? And I think for me, it boils down to two main things. The first is the idea that for queer people, in imagining us in the past, we can kind of see a way and believe that we can exist in the future. It's a way to kind of create this continual narrative of queerness as something that has always existed and will continue to exist in the future. Obviously, if you're a queer person in America, probably not just in America, honestly, right now, but obviously speaking from an American, it is pretty rough out there. So every time I read a queer historical romance book where homophobia or threat of violence or legal trouble is the main topic, I will have this feeling of oh, well, they made it through back in the 1800s, so surely we will also make it through these trying times in the modern day. I also think the fact that so much of queer history either had to be very secretive or oral in nature, or even the fact now when we do have primary sources where there are historical figures that were pretty openly queer, there will still be some historians that kind of play the they were just good friends type of card. These kind of stories are a chance to imagine a world where queerness can be more discussed and explored openly in the time period of the novel. And my other main point is purely on an enjoyment level, which is the fact that I don't think just straight people should have fun, campy bodice rippers. It's just about fairness and the fact that the historical romance genre has been one of the oldest and most established subgenres in romance publishing. And as queer romances in general tend to become more common, it makes sense for this subgenre to grow as well. Okay, now I wanted to pivot and talk about specifically things that I really like in romance books. Pretty much all the books I'm going to talk about have at least one or two of the things that I'm going to mention on this list, so you can kind of get a general sense of what I enjoy about the books that are going to be included in this video. The first thing is that I really have to connect and like both members of the relationship for a book to be a favorite of mine. I do feel like I tend to like one member of the couple a little bit more than the other one, but I at least have to understand where both of the characters are coming from and their perspectives in order to really enjoy their relationship dynamic. I tend to be very much a character-focused reader first, so I want the relationship and the study of the relationship to be front and center in the romance book. I do like it if there is a main plot that gets woven into how their dynamic changes and maybe throws in a plot point that they both have to work together on. But I can also handle a no plots, just vibes book totally fine. I have to say I don't really care that much about historical accuracy. I obviously like when it's there, but it's not really something that's going to make or break my reading experience. I also don't really care about insta-love or insta-lust. As long as the characters are communicating and bonding in that early section of the novel, I just need to kind of understand why they are attracted to the other person. And lastly, I think almost all of the books I'm going to talk about here do have on-page smut scenes. Personally, I think smut in books is good because I feel like it's another location to kind of show the characters' dynamics. And I feel like in some of these books, they definitely use their sex scenes as almost a pinnacle point for the characters either taking ownership of their identity or kind of working through their trauma or some other issue that they were having. So they're not just gratuitous smut for smut's sake, they actually serve a point in the novel. Okay, with that extended intro out of the way, let's get into talking about all of the books I want to recommend in this video. I'm gonna start off by talking about some of the novels set in the 1800s that I've read, and then we'll move into more recent time periods, as well as talking about the historical fantasy subgenre. Okay, so the first set of books I wanted to mention are the Doomsday books by K.J. Charles. This is The Secret Lives of Country Gentlemen and The Nobleman's Guide to Seducing a Scoundrel. These are a duo of companion novels that are set 13 years apart, and it is best if you read them in order. They both are MM romances. The first one I want to say is set around 1810s-ish. It's during the Napoleonic Wars. The first one is kind of a second chance romance. The follows our main character Gareth, who is this English lord who's recently come into his inheritance and has to move to his remote estate in Romney Marsh, and finds out his old flame Joss is part of this very powerful smuggling criminal family called the Doomsdays in that area. And then the sequel is following Joss's cousin Luke, who is working for the new Earl, whose evil aunt and uncle are trying to like prove he's not legitimate so they can take over the title instead of him. These books are both so good. KJ Charles is really known for being pretty focused on like historical accuracy and really fleshing out the world for her characters. And I feel like with the second one specifically, you can really see that. I also feel like in these books, these side characters I like love just as much as like the main couple, and will also have arcs over the course of the book of their own. I also like that both these books kind of have a non-traditional third act breakup, where it's kind of like other plot stuff that is the main climax of the book, not them breaking up, which I tend to enjoy more than the romance breaking up being the climax. Okay, the next series I wanted to talk about is the Turner series by Cat Sebastian. And the books in this series are The Soldier Scoundrel, The Lawrence Brown Affair, and The Ruin of a Rake, plus A Little Light Mischief, which is a novella. This is a series of companion novels that you technically can read in any order, but it definitely makes most sense if you read them chronologically. Although, to be honest, I actually read these in reverse chronological order, going 3, then 2, then 1, then 3.5, and they're all set around like 1815s-ish. The main 3 books in the trilogy are all MM romances, and then the novella is a FF romance. The first 2 books in the series follow the 2 brothers in the Turner family, which is Jack and Georgie. And then the 3rd book, as well as the novella, kind of are just about other characters tangentially related to them. I obviously love the 2nd and 3rd book in the series so much that I own physical copies of them. Overall, Cat Sebastian's books tend to be very sweet, a lot of like hurt comfort. They are a little bit no plot, just vibes in some aspects, and maybe a little bit are more like formulaic in their third act breakups, but I feel like they still hit every single time. The first one, A Soldier Scoundrel, follows Jack and Oliver. Oliver is a soldier from the Napoleonic Wars, and Jack is kind of like a private eye who works primarily with wealthy women whose husbands have either like abused them or like wronged them in some other way. And they first meet because Oliver finds out that his younger sister actually used Jack to get rid of her abusive husband. Their romance is very much like opposites attract, enemies to lovers. And then in the Lawrence Brown Affair, we have our main characters, Lawrence and Georgie. Lawrence is the Earl of Radnor, and then Georgie is a con man who has to pretend to be Lawrence's secretary, as he has kind of like fled to the countryside to avoid a bad situation in London. I love the dynamic of the main characters in this book so much. I also would say it's a very, very loose kind of like Beauty and the Beast type of retelling, and Lawrence is also a single dad, and the element of that trope in this book is really, really good. And lastly, for the main series books, we have The Ruin of a Rake, which is the romance between Julian and Lord Courtney. Lord Courtney is like the stereotypical, like capital R rake type character, just like a total bad boy, always drinking and partying and acting like he doesn't care what other people think of him. And then Julian is like the most straight-laced of straight-laced guys who ends up interacting with Courtney when Julian's older sister, who is friends with Courtney, is trying to help him like reform his image so that Courtney can get custody of his nephew, who is actually Lawrence's son. And Lawrence does not think that Courtney is a good influence on him for kind of fair reasons. Their romance is the first one I read, and it definitely took me a little bit of time to get into this book. But I feel like my feelings in reading this went from, okay, this is a little bit too much, to, okay, they are kind of cute together, to then, oh my god, they are in love, to then, oh my god, they are soulmates. I just really, really like the dynamic of the characters in this book. And the third act breakup is probably the most reasonable out of any of the ones in this series. Okay, now I wanted to move into talking about the Mischief and Matchmaking series by Emma R. Alban. I'm pretty sure this is just a duology. The first one being Don't Want You Like a Best Friend, and the second one being You're the Problem, It's You. The first one is an FF romance, and the sequel is an MM romance. They are both set around 1853, and you definitely should read these books in order. The first one follows our main characters, Beth and Gwen. During Beth's debut season, they quickly become best friends, and then learn that both of their widowed parents, so Beth's mom and Gwen's dad, used to have like a thing together back when they were much younger. And to kind of like hatch a plan so that Beth will not have to try and find a husband, they decide they're going to kind of like parent trap their parents to getting back together. And in the process of trying to do this, they start falling in love with each other as well. I really like the first one. I think it is just so cute. I'm a really big Friends to Lovers fan. And I really love the energy here of like the comp het making them think that they're just good friends. But then nope, it's lesbianism. Very much what if we kissed but we were both girls energy. And then the second one, You're the Problem It's You, follows both of the characters' cousins. I didn't really like this one as much. I gave it 3.5 stars when I read it. I just didn't really like James as much as a main character, but I did think the overarching plot was good. I liked the inclusion of all of like the side characters, and I think it built on the story of the original one pretty well. But the first one I gave 5 stars and is the one I really want to recommend here. Okay, now I wanted to talk about the Lucky Lovers of London series by Jess Everly. These are a series of companion novels that all kind of deal with the same like friend group set in 1880s London. There are 3 romances and 1 FF romance, and I think you kind of can read them in any order. I read them in the order of 2, then 1, then 3, and there is a 4th book but it is not yet released. It's coming out in July of 2025. These books in general are very much like cute, no plot, just vibes. I think they are very much character focused, so your mileage may vary depending on how much you like the main character's dynamics. I think the second one, which is A Rulebook for Restless Rogues, is my favorite. I think it has both the most like real plot of all of them, and the main characters, David and Noah's dynamics, is definitely my favorite. The like childhood best friends to lovers who have been pining for each other their entire friendship just like gets me every time. And overall, in reading all of these books, I've really learned to love the like squad that has built up around the main friend group. Overall, just a really big fan of this series. Okay, now I wanted to move into the historical fantasy section of this video. The first one is a series I talked about many times on my channel, and that is the Last Binding trilogy by Freya Marske. So we have A Marvelous Light, A Restless Truth, and A Power Unbound. These books are all set in Edwardian era London, and you do have to read them in order because there is a overarching plot across the entirety of the trilogy. And each book has POVs from a different couple. The first one is an romance with Robin and Edwin. Then we have the FF romance of Blythe and Violet. And lastly, another romance of Alan and Hawthorne. These books have very involved world building and magic lore. I find that all the characters are like really well fleshed out. And since each book is from like a different POV, you really get to see everyone from like so many different angles depending on whose like mind you're following. I will say one thing that I definitely didn't notice when listening to the audiobooks, but in reading them physically, I do think there was kind of like a quirkiness factor in the writing style that can like jump out at you and in a way make immersion in these books a little bit harder. So I definitely recommend the audiobooks as a way to avoid that. In terms of like a general setup for the book's plot, it basically is kind of like a fish out of water story where a main character, Robin, gets a job in this British government agency and then learns that basically magic is real and he's supposed to work as the kind of like non-magic liaison with the magical government. And he is paired to work up with this guy named Edwin. However, some like nefarious people think that Robin has the secret to this like magical MacGuffin item that they're trying to find, and they end up putting a curse on him. So him and Edwin have to like work together to unravel the curse, trying to figure out like what these bad people are after, and kind of like end up stumbling into this larger conspiracy within the magical government to try and take control of all of the magic that's present in the world. Okay, the next series I wanted to talk about is the Charm of Magpie series by KJ Charles. This is another trilogy of books that follows one story arc, so you do have to read them in order. And it also follows the same couple across the entirety of the series. I think there's also like 3 spin-off books that are set in the same universe but follow different characters, but I haven't read those ones yet. I believe these are set in like late Victorian era, and it follows our main couple of Lucian Vaudrey, aka Lord Crane, and Stephen Day. The general plot of these books is that our main character, Lord Crane, is coming back to England after having spent the majority of his life abroad after the mysterious death of his father and his older brother. He finds out that he has been inflicted with the same curse that ends up killing them, and he recruits the help of the magician Stephen Day to try and lift the curse and figure out who is trying to harm him and his family. And along the way, Crane learns that he is actually descended from this incredibly powerful magician called the Magpie Lord. And because of that, like nefarious magicians will always be trying to hunt him down to try and get access to his bloodline and his power. There is a lot of good action, some very cool magical elements that happen in like the final confrontations in the first and third book of the series that just go so hard. I really like the focus of the relationship dynamic between Crane and Stephen being something that's very much fleshed out and talked about in all of the books of the series. And I also feel like their character dynamic speaks to me like specifically. I just find it really funny that like Crane is this like 6'3", incredibly like handsome, blonde, blue-eyed nobleman. And then Steven is like 5 foot even, but Crane constantly makes mentions to the fact that he finds Steven like so dangerous and alluring because of all of the like powerful magic he can do. The only negative and kind of like critique I have for this book is the fact that all of these books are relatively short. I think they're all maybe like under 250 pages. And I think because of that, the like side characters that we meet in the book don't really get enough of time to shine on their own, which again makes this book a little bit more your mileage may vary based on how much you enjoy the dynamic of Crane and Steven to like the series overall. Since there isn't a ton else going on in terms of the side characters for you to really like sink your teeth into. Okay, and the last series that we're going to be talking about in this video is one I've actually only read the first book in the series, but I'm very excited to read more of it in the future. Definitely a goal of mine actually in 2025 to read the rest of the series, and that is the Magic in Manhattan series by Ali Theron. I've read the first book, Spellbound, and then I still have to read the other 2 books in the main trilogy, which is Star-Crossed and Wonderstruck. This is again a series that is one full story. You have to read them in order, and they follow the same couple throughout. And I think there also is a spin-off series, or at least of 2 books, that follows a like side couple that is introduced in the main trilogy. But again, I have not read that one yet. And I think this also might be one of the only books that I have on this list that's set in the 20th century, as these books are set during Prohibition era New York City. It follows our main characters, Arthur and Rory. Rory is this type of magician called a scryer, so he basically is able to like touch objects and like learn their history through like visions that he has. And he gets a request from Arthur, who has this incredibly powerful magical item, and despite not being a magician himself, is kind of part of a secret order of people who are working to protect these magical items from falling into the wrong hands. So Arthur brings this magical item to Rory's shop to hopefully learn more about it. And after a lot of kind of like back and forth, they strike up a relationship. I really like this first book in the series. I feel like it had a lot of like fun action, a lot of like good character dynamics with the main characters, because Arthur and Rory are just like so stupid in how they interact with each other. It is so infuriating, but also like very good in a romance way. Definitely building a lot of tension in terms of their relationship dynamic. And also this is the only series in this video that I'm mentioning that has completely closed door like romance smut scenes. It is like mentioned that stuff is going down, but it's never actually on page. Okay, those are all of the books I wanted to talk about for this video. As I mentioned in the intro, queer historical romances is really like one of my bread and butter favorite genres to read from. I do own a couple more books from this subgenre on my physical TBR, but I have so many more like available through my library and like Libby and Hoopla that I want to get to in the future. So probably in like another year or so, depending on how many more of these books I'm able to read and find like favorites from, I will definitely do a part 2 of this video sometime then. But that is going to be it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it this far in the video, leave a little top hat emoji in honor of all the Victorian gentlemen I've been talking about in this video. If you guys enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you were able to like, comment, or subscribe if you aren't already. If you'd like to see my reading updates in real time, you can follow me on the Storygraph, which is linked in the description. And that is going to be it for me today. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!